Okay, great.
Good morning. Chairman Ressler, council members, Mr. Lander, if you're still here. I'm Jason Forrester, and I'm representing National Security Leaders for America, a bipartisan, all-volunteer organization of national security leaders established in 2021 to counter growing threats to our democracy. Today, I'll address the dangerous possibility of deploying National Guard troops for domestic policing in New York City. Before my presentation, allow me to offer some relevant background information. Starting almost 20 years ago, I was an advocate for the National Guard in the context of their heavy utilization during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Later, I was appointed by President Obama to serve as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, where I developed manpower and personnel policies for the Guard and Reserve. Now to the heart of my testimony. Misusing the National Guard to police our streets is dangerous to our democracy, ineffective at reducing crime, and potentially unlawful. First, it's dangerous. Using the National Guard for policing blurs the line between military and civilian authority. Our troops swear to defend the nation against external threats, not to patrol our neighborhoods. A recent Pentagon memo establishes something deeply troubling: a permanent, federally monitored civil defense quick reaction force which has 500 personnel per state, identical riot gear, and monthly federal reporting. This weakens the authority of governors and normalizes what should be exceptional. Federally commanded armed soldiers on city streets chill free speech. They intimidate residents, and they discourage civic engagement. When we normalize such patrols at home, we weaken the trust that keeps our democracy strong. Second, it's ineffective. Guard units are not trained for community-oriented police work. Also, the data doesn't support deployment since New York City is experiencing declining violent crime rates. Effectively addressing crime requires well-funded civilian solutions, and deploying troops ignores root causes and risks making matters worse. Third, it's potentially unlawful. The Posse Comitatus Act makes it a crime to use the military as a domestic police force. The President can federalize the Guard under the Insurrection Act, but only for narrow conditions. Ordinary street crime doesn't meet this threshold. A federal judge in Los Angeles found Guard deployment was improper because there was no rebellion and civilian law enforcement was capable of handling the situation. In addition, cross-state deployments without a governor's consent violate state sovereignty. In conclusion, domestic use of the military must not outpace the law. New York City deserves real public safety solutions, not a military occupation. I urge you to support law-bound, governor-led actions to prioritize de-escalation over coercion and to demand transparency and oversight. The National Guard should defend the nation, not patrol its neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
It means a great deal to have you here today, and thank you for that really compelling testimony.
Chair Ressler, distinguished committee members, community leaders, advocates, and friends. Thank you all for being here and for your leadership and commitment to making New York City a place with space and grace for all to claim lives of passion, purpose, dignity, and respect. I speak today wearing several hats, having served as the founding commissioner for the New York City Department of Veteran Services, as a combat veteran with nearly 30 years of military service, as a psychiatrist and advocate for accelerating access to breakthrough treatments for PTSD, and as a member of the National Security Leaders for America, a bipartisan, all-volunteer organization of senior national security leaders established in 2021 to counter growing threats to our democratic institutions, constitutional norms, and the rule of law. The recent election should remind Americans of what New York has always embodied: resilience through diversity. Mayor-elect Mamdani cannot govern alone. He'll require stable, cooperative, intergovernmental relationships to govern effectively, as well as alliances that span neighborhoods, faiths, and political tribes. He'll need a civic resilience strategy to prove that democracy still works when citizens choose cooperation over chaos, that New Yorkers can mobilize to protect the city from federal overreach. Ensuring that federal authorities adhere to long-standing norms is a bipartisan imperative, regardless of who occupies the White House. The principles at stake are constitutional, not partisan. Federal overreach is far from theoretical. We have already seen the opening moves in cities across the nation, including improper use of the National Guard for routine policing. This dangerous overreach undercuts military readiness, flouts the rule of law, and does nothing to address the root causes of crime. These are not the actions of a federal government engaged in normal policy disagreements. These are signals designed to destabilize trust, sow fear, and divide communities. New York cannot afford passivity, nor can it rely on hope. It must respond with structure, discipline, and unity of purpose. This is why I urge the creation of what could be called Operation Gotham Strong, a comprehensive multi-sector strategy designed to defend the city's local autonomy, strengthen public confidence, and protect vulnerable communities. Key elements include: 1, create a civic resilience coalition designed to coordinate safety, communications, and service continuity. The mayor-led coalition's first action could feature a public signing ceremony for a rule of law compact, pledging obedience to orders, zero tolerance for vigilantism, and full protection for press and election staff. Earning the trust of all New Yorkers is of utmost importance, no matter whom they voted for mayor. 2, adopt a Truth in 30 communication standard. Rumor spreads fear. Fear fuels authoritarianism. New York should commit to releasing verified information within 30 minutes of any viral rumor, federal action, or safety threat. False claims about raids, curfews, or unrest would meet immediate multilingual facts through Notify NYC, 311, municipal social media, and community radio. 3, rebuild trust, confidence, and cohesion. After years of political whiplash and venal corruption, New Yorkers need proof that government can function under extreme duress without capitulating or collapsing. If New York governs with calm, clarity, and resolve, it can model civic resilience and sustainable democracy for the entire country. In closing, New York is entering a struggle that is larger than one city and larger than one mayor. It is nothing less than a test of whether American democracy can withstand a federal government willing to intimidate and harm its own citizens. Recent federal actions risk undermining the normal cooperative relationships between federal and municipal authorities. Such actions, if expanded, could interfere with normal governance processes and undermine confidence in election administration. But New York has a chance to prove the opposite, that civic resilience is still possible, that governance can outlast grievance. Rising above the din of politics as usual, New Yorkers must meet the demands of this moment, together, with unwavering strength and shared purpose. Thank you for your leadership in addressing these critical challenges. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Service to our nation, and the courage and clarity of your words that you shared with us here today. Councilmember Morano, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
Thank you, everybody, for your testimony. A couple of brief questions specifically for General Sutton. General Sutton, thank you again for your decades of service to the nation and to New York City's veterans. I appreciate the intent behind your testimony. I have a couple of questions about the practical framework of how a few aspects would go. Specifically, the Truth in 30 standard, which calls for verified information within 30 minutes of a major rumor or threat. How do we ensure accuracy when agencies are pressured to respond so quickly in situations that might be fast-moving, incomplete, or still under investigation? Obviously, you, having headed a city agency, are probably better prepared to answer this than most.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question, Councilmember Morano, and for all that you've done for veterans over the years. The Truth in 30 tool is really drawn from emergency management. This has been used by FEMA. It's been adopted in many places. Perhaps not truth in 30. That is something that New York City could pioneer. But I think what is critical and what has been learned in city after city and crisis after crisis, not just today's crises, but over time, is that communication has to be clear, it has to be credible, and it has to be really actionable. People have to know that even when things seem absolutely dire, that there is a source that they can trust with credible communication. If New York City could stand up a platform like 311 in all 5 boroughs in the time that they did it, I am confident that we can do it here and do it in a way that supports those New Yorkers who are afraid already, but who are facing uncertainty, who are fearful, who see masked agents, who see armed personnel and know that something's not right, and who deserve accurate, credible, and quick information.
You've emphasized that New Yorkers need proof that government can function under extreme duress without collapsing. In your assessment, which specific city systems are currently most vulnerable under stress, and how does your proposed framework directly strengthen those systems?
Sure. No, I think that we've seen over these last several years, emergency management certainly has been tasked with the migrant situation and the budget implications and all that goes with that. I think our legal, it's already been said, our legal department is grossly understaffed. I think when you look at the staffing changes within the military, the judge advocate generals have been hollowed out, inspector generals. There is a real paucity of resources, both at the local and state and federal level here, that have to be addressed. That's why the Civic Resilience Coalition that I suggested, this would be a mayor-led coalition that would bring together leaders from public agencies at the city, at the state level, would bring together leaders from labor and business and immigration networks, education, but really be an all hands on deck. Talk about a quick reaction force. This could be a civic tool that could build confidence, build trust, and shore up those agencies and resources that are really under duress.
Thank you.
Thank Councilmember Morano for such thoughtful questions, and he was just recently appointed this committee. We're very happy to have him. I'd like to ask questions, I think, for the whole panel, but maybe I'd start, firstly, kind of direct them to the former Deputy Assistant Secretary. You mentioned in your testimony that guard units are not trained for community-oriented police work. Are there risks or concerns you have about safety in New York City as a result of these deployments or these and these similar deployments that have happened all across the country?
There certainly are examples in our history where the utilization of the National Guard for policing purposes has gone awry. The most prominent example being 1970 at Kent State, which is obviously a well-known, unfortunate example. I think it comes back to what you said a second ago, Mr. Chairman. If you're not trained for the mission, then you're going to have a hard time successfully carrying out the mission.
You mean when I was quoting you? What I said a second, just to be clear.
So no, I do believe that, to reiterate my testimony, if they're not well trained for it, then that could easily end up in situations where you have a dangerous situation with the use of force by soldiers who are not properly equipped for it. I mean, I'll give you one quick example. When you look at Washington, D.C., in terms of how the National Guard has been used there, one of the most common descriptions of how Washington, D.C. is used, or how the National Guard troops have been used in Washington, D.C., has been for things such as protecting storefronts, picking up trash, and doing lawn care, which sort of boggles the mind. But I think it partly gets at
Lawn care, really?
Yeah, really lawn care. I think it partly gets at the general subject of you don't want to put people in a situation where there could be this kind of friction between the population and the armed element.
Yeah. To play devil's advocate a little bit, Governor Hochul and governors before her have deployed National Guard into our subways and in other areas in the city when there's been a concern about public safety. When those deployments have occurred, you've heard questions raised about, are these people trained for this kind of work? Is this actually beneficial for deterring criminal acts? Is what's happening, is that a different approach than what's being considered here? And why is this a more concerning model that the Trump administration has kind of activated?
It is categorically different. And to get into U.S. law for a second, Title 32 of U.S. law allows for governors to mobilize troops for different contingencies within their state. Title 10, on the other hand, is the utilization under federal purposes. So, on the surface, it is something that I think gives a lot of people pause, as you were saying a second ago, regarding troops being in situations that we're not accustomed to having them. The utilization of those troops under the governor's authority, which I would strongly emphasize that piece, because this is not what we're talking about in terms of the possible federal use of forces, for instance, through this quick reaction force is one example. But the utilization of those troops, as anyone who's gone through Penn Station or Grand Central, these troops are providing presence. They're not even going into bags or doing, frisking people. They're standing there in case something goes quite haywire. So bottom line, it's Title 32, it's under the governor's authority, and it's categorically different from Title 10. And how the governor decides to use those forces is certainly a subject for public debate.
I just want to ask the panel, anything you all like to elaborate on further on this topic?
Just to build on what Jason's been saying here, after 9/11, New York stood up Task Force Empire Shield, and those are the troops that we see in the subways. Those troops are trained to coordinate with local NYPD and state law enforcement. What happens when troops are federalized and thrown into a crisis or a law enforcement situation? The federal forces use, they apply different policies, federal policies. They have different tools. You risk using federal intelligence tools, for example, of surveillance and other capacities. With troops who have not been trained and for whom bad things can happen.
Yeah.
And as has been said across the panel here, this is not what troops have signed up for. There's been anecdotal evidence to this point. We'll have to see over time. But I've heard of a number of troops who are making decisions around the kitchen table about whether to stay in uniform. That's both active as well as the Reserve National Guard forces. I've heard of, very high-ranking folks, turning their back away from a promotion to flag rank admiral or general. This is a tremendous waste of resources if this is allowed to continue. And I think that, well, let's just be clear. Cities should not be used as military training sites. Nothing good comes from that. Americans, New Yorkers, are not the enemy. And finally, we cannot have National Guard troops mobilized and deployed to do routine law enforcement. Their role is for, as we saw after Superstorm Sandy, as we saw for the epidemic, as the pandemic, as we've seen with the infrastructure needs here in a city like New York, the hospitals, the power grids, the water plants. This is what our National Guardsmen are trained to do. It's what we do. We live to serve. And I think New York City is in a good position to uphold the rule of law, to protect constitutional safeguards, and to do so in a way that makes it clear in a New York way. We don't do fear. We do planning. We do preparedness. We do protection.
Yep.
And, you know, if we can protect the rule of law here, we can protect it anywhere.
Very well said. Thank you. Mr. Matos, do you want to add something?
One small note, just to give a context. So our constituency does make up of members in the National Guard that in this present moment feel they don't have a voice because they're in service. So that's why I'm here to speak on their behalf. A lot of these folks, especially lower enlisted, are concerned. As the Trump administration and federalization comes into scope, they're trying to figure out, am I going to be used against my own communities? Am I going to be used against my own families and my own neighborhoods? And that's a very unfortunate situation for us to be in. You know, I joined the military at 18 years old, right out of high school, and all I wanted to do was give back to my community and protect those folks that I care about the most. I can't imagine being in those shoes now, where they're now wondering, am I going to be able to protect them, or am I going to be used against them? And that's why we are here today, to ensure that this doesn't happen. So thank you for your time.
Incredibly powerful. I had one final question before I let you all go, and I am just so grateful for your time and your expertise here today. Vice President Vance has stated that the Trump administration is considering kind of utilization of the Insurrection Act of 1807 to get around some of the recent court orders that have been issued so far to place limitations on how the National Guard can be activated. Any suggestions for how New York should be prepared to respond to that that you'd like to advise on? And if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. I would start by saying that the conditions are not met for us to utilize the Insurrection Act. We do not have the kind of lawlessness that would merit using this element of law.
I would also say that what's going to be critical going forward is to maintain transparency, to maintain accurate communication. That's why I suggested the Truth in 30 tool, to convene a civic resilience coalition, and to demand citywide. We as leaders must provide transparency, accountability. There must be legal resources to both protect individuals and families, as well as to protect the institutions and the provisions of the Constitution. And we have to have after-action reports, independent, that evaluate the use of force. New Yorkers need to know what the rules of force are. It has to be independent. It has to be, in terms of the evaluation, there has to be transparency and accountability. And to the extent that New York does what New York has long done, and that is to rise up in the face of overwhelming challenge. I'm confident that we can do this again.
I am, once again, just incredibly grateful for each of your service to our country and for the courage and the clarity of your convictions that you've articulated today. I certainly appreciate it, and I really want to just thank each of you for being with us. Mr. Forrester, former General Sutton, and Mr. Matos and Ms. Bishop, thank you each. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We have 2 more panels, so really appreciate everybody's patience. Hopefully, maybe stretch into 3. We'll now invite Quinn Raymond from Protect Democracy, a former constituent. We still love you anyway. David Moss from the Legal Defense.